Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to my weekly wrap-up of September 13th, 2015. I have 9 things to talk about today, so maybe grab some tea. I also have some cookies. I finally got Biscoff cookies, and settle in because this may be very long. The first 3 things I'm going to talk about are the trade comics I read. The first one was Sweet Tooth, Volume 2 in Captivity by Jeff Lemire. This is a series about a world in which everybody's been dying, has died from a disease, and all of the children born after this event are hybrid animals and humans. Gus is one of these hybrid children. He's part deer, part human, and at the beginning of the first volume, his father dies, and he is kind of rescued by a man named Jeopard. In the second volume, you get a bit more backstory for Jeopard. You learn what happened to Jeopard that got him to where he currently is, and you learn a bit more about Gus's existence and about his father and possibly about his mother, which I thought was interesting, but I am at this saturation point for dystopias where everybody dies from a plague or a disease and everybody is just killing each other and hating each other because it's such an unkind world that this series is about. I'm just a little tired of this type of story. The other thing that I noticed in the second volume is that all of the women in Sweet Tooth are dead or prostitutes, which is also not fun. I'm gonna leave it at that. Next, I read Alex and Ada Volume 1 by Jonathan Luna and Sarah Vaughn. I've heard some really great things about this, and I am going to be a dissenter. I think that reading this is like eating extremely bland oatmeal when you already don't like oatmeal. Mainly, I think it's the artwork. It's oatmeal colored, and it's incredibly simplistic. All of the characters seem very stocky and square and stiff to me. I just really don't like the artwork. The story is about a guy who receives a lifelike android from his grandmother, I think. He wants to return her, but then eventually decides that he wants her to become sentient. He thinks she should be more. This is a world in which AI exists, and he sets off to jailbreak her mind. And I think the story is good. By the final part, I was actually getting interested in it, but it's kind of been done before. In fact, I felt like the plot of this first volume was like the first episode of that TV show Humans, except visually blah. So, I think this is only a 3-volume series. I just learned that this morning. So I wasn't going to continue, but if there's only 3 volumes, I think I might try to get the other 2 from Interlibrary Alone eventually and finish the series. Maybe I'll like it much more with the 2nd and 3rd volumes, but at the moment, I'm just super meh about it. The 3rd trade comic that I read was Volume 3 of Ms. Marvel, following the adventures of the new Ms. Marvel, Kamala Khan. I was a little unsure about Volume 2, but I really enjoyed Volume 3. Loki shows up at the beginning, and then there's this storyline where Kamala kind of gets this crush on a guy, and it's very sudden, and she kind of learns a lesson about that, and I liked how that storyline went. It was a wee bit predictable in that sort of you can always tell who the villain's gonna be way, but I liked some of the things that Kamala had to say about it as she realized what was going on. So I gave this 4 stars. I really like the characters, and even some of the teenage stuff doesn't bother me as much as it does in other things. Next, let me talk about the first 2 books in this Harris Serrano bind-up by Elizabeth Moon. This is a military science fiction or space opera series that she wrote back in the 1990s, and the first 2 books which I read this week were Hunting Party and Sporting Chance. I'm gonna put this down because it's quite heavy. This series is about an ex-regular space service captain named Harris Serrano. She's older, she's actually in her 40s, and she has, at the beginning of the series, recently resigned her position in a disastrous event where she was basically court-martialed for not following a superior's orders, which she knew were stupid, when you get a bunch of people killed. So she disobeyed orders, but saved the day, and she's still court-martialed, and she resigns because she is told if she does that, her crew will be spared. Unfortunately, she was lied to. So after she does this, she has to find a job. She takes a job as a captain of an old lady's space yacht and goes off to have adventures because the old lady, Cecilia, is not all that she seems at first. In the first adventure, Cecilia has to take charge of her nephew Ronnie and his friends because Ronnie has crossed the prince and has to be gotten out of the way, and they're going to take these younglings off to Bunny's planet, which is like a space station or like a man-made planet, and they're going to spend the hunting season there. Cecilia is crazy about horses. She's an eventer. She rides to hounds with like fox hunting and stuff. And so there is a ton of fox hunting and horse stuff in this first book. And that mashup of the space opera setting with the fox hunting is kind of weird. I think that I just object to it being so much. It's an odd combination, and it doesn't let up. It is interesting, though. It makes for a ridiculously good, fun story, but an emphasis, I think, on ridiculous. I had a hard time taking some of this stuff seriously because everybody and everything has this layer of ridiculous on top of it. Harris is like the only person who's kind of normal, and it makes her very boring feeling. She doesn't feel like a rock of normalcy in the story to me. She just feels really boring. And this is something that I'm going to take over into the second book as well. In the second book, some things that they discover from the first book, like somebody who was using Cecilia's yacht for smuggling, that plotline carries over. But also the prince who's mentioned in the first book, they notice that he's very stupid. And they're trying to figure out why, and it turns into this huge big deal in the second book with people being attacked and poisoned and, you know, worrying about being assassinated and everything. I like that this series has two older women whose friendship and their trust with each other is kind of the heart of the series. That is a great thing to read about. It's just kind of rare. But Cecilia is a very interesting person. You get a lot of these tidbits about her past, about her hobbies, about her family, the politics she's involved in. Harris is boring. There's pretty much nothing that you know about her. You know she comes from a military family. You know she's had a military career. She's military. Military. I want something more from that. The only additional thing introduced about her is that she has a love interest, which I don't care about, and it kind of gets in the way. I just don't like that. I think this is a fun series, and I'm going to be reading the third book that I have this coming week, but it is not in any way similar to the tone and the feel and the tension in the Vada's War series. I just really got way more involved in the Vada's War series than I think I'm going to become in this one. Now, there are a bunch of other books to read, so I might change my mind, but for now, I think it's okay, and I'm kind of warming up to it. But if Harris doesn't become a more interesting character, she's like the main character, I don't know what I'm going to do. Next, I read two mysteries. The first one that I read was Strong Poison by Dorothy L. Sayers. This is one of the slightly later Lord Peter Wimsey mysteries, and I started with this book because I'm pretty sure it's the book that Catherine started with, and she's read like 5 or 6 of them now, and she made this sound really great. I think Jane actually recommended them to Catherine, so I have both of them to thank for discovering this mystery series. I believe that Dorothy L. Sayers was a contemporary of Agatha Christie, which kind of gives you an idea of when she was writing these books. They're from like the 20s or 30s, and they're set kind of in the 20s and 30s. In this book, a woman named Harriet Vane has been accused of poisoning with arsenic her ex-boyfriend, and Lord Peter is at her trial. He decides that she is innocent, and when the jury cannot come to an agreement and they have to wait for another trial, he takes this reprieve to investigate her case and prove why she didn't do it. Which, it was a slightly, I felt, run-of-the-mill plot. It wasn't incredibly original feeling to me, but I really like the characters. Lord Peter is way more emotionally available than other detectives I've read, like Sherlock and Poirot. I feel like you could sit down and have a conversation with him and it would be like uproariously funny. And what I like the most is that he has strong relationships with people. He is fun and funny, and he clearly cares about people, which I think is a human interest element kind of missing from other mysteries that I've read. So I'm definitely going to be continuing with this series. I actually have the 2 books that come after Strong Poison out from the library, so I'll be reading those shortly, and I'm very much looking forward to it. The other mystery that I read was The Daughter of Time by Josephine Tay. I also have Jane and Catherine to thank for making me really interested in this. This is from the 1950s, I think. I should probably look this stuff up, shouldn't I? It is also kind of a middle volume in a series, the Alan Grant mystery series. And in this case, it opens with Grant in the hospital. He has like fallen through a trap door and he's busted his leg and his back. And he spends the entire book investigating a mystery from his hospital bed while people come to visit him and bring him stuff. To entertain him while he's in bed, one of his friends brings him a collection of pictures, and one of these pictures, he thinks it's the face of a good person, a judge, an upstanding person. It turns out it's a picture of Richard III, who, as many people know, is maligned with the story of the princes in the tower and killing his nephews, and Grant wants to find out what really happened. He thinks that Richard III doesn't look like a murderer, so he wants to know if there's any chance that Richard III did not actually commit these murders, and it just goes from there. And I really liked the setup, the idea of this detective doing all of this from bed and from history books. And I think it had some interesting things to say about events that never happened, and yet they're part of, popular culture and history, and everybody who was there know they didn't really happen that way, but they don't correct people about it. It's called, in this book, Tony Pandy is the term they use for it, which I thought was really funny. I'm never going to forget that. Everything is going to be like, I know what that is. That's Tony Pandy. So I highly recommend this one if you are interested in reading mysteries and older mysteries as well. Strong Poison and The Daughter of Time were both really good. Next up is Tales of Neveryon by Samuel R. Delany. This is Delany's take on sword and sorcery fantasy, but he's actually using this to talk more about intellectual philosophical topics, things like economics, the introduction of money into a society and how that changes not just the economy, getting rid of a trade or barter system, but also how it affects gender dynamics, sexual politics in the same society, things about inventions and how those change people. And of course, I mean, it is Delany, so there's also quite a bit about gender and race and sexuality mixed in there. And some of those things can be a little bit awkward for me to read about. So in this case, it was a lot easier subject matter wise than Dahlgren was. It's not nearly as extreme as Dahlgren, but there are just some moments where Delany describes things involving genitals, and I'm like, I don't want to know that, but you're doing it for a reason, and I gotta figure out why. Not exactly sure why yet, but it makes you think. That's the thing I have to say about Delany, is that no matter how uncomfortable I feel reading some of his stuff, I feel like I'm really thinking, and of course he writes beautifully. I'm not sure when I'll get to the other 3 volumes, but hopefully in the not too distant future. The final thing I'm going to talk about this week was North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. I buddy read this with Victoria over this past week, and it was great. This was a 5-star book, guys. I loved the story. I've also watched most of the miniseries now, and I also really like the miniseries, but I think I prefer my head version of North and South right now. The story follows a woman named Margaret whose family is forced to move from the south of England and their comfortable kind of country home to a manufacturing town called Milton in the north of England. There is big culture shock. She meets a man named Mr. Thornton in Milton. He runs a cotton mill, and it's kind of like the Pride and Prejudice misunderstanding upon meeting storyline, except that it's more than that. Margaret and Mr. Thornton misunderstand each other because of some like cultural differences, but they also have different political and social beliefs, and they talk about them, they kind of argue about them, and while they disagree and they kind of repulse the other person, they're also really attracted to each other. They find the other person challenging, which I think is a great basis for a relationship or, you know, a future romance. And over the course of the story, they influence each other and they kind of have these reversals and they eventually seem to meet somewhere in the middle. I really liked this relationship. I'm really focusing on the romance aspect of this, but there are other themes in the novel. There is a strike and talk about why people are doing that, how the hands that work in the mills have a conflict with the masters. There are things about social classes and everything. It's just a really great book. I really recommend this. If you liked Pride and Prejudice, or maybe even if you like Jane Eyre, this is a classic to pick up, kind of along those lines with its own twist. Well worth reading. Okay, I gotta wrap all this up because I have to go somewhere, so sorry for the rather abrupt ending, but that's what I read this past week. If you've read any of them and you want to talk to me about them, please comment down below, and I will talk to you again in my next video. Bye.